We all have to okay that. And have you all got your presentations on USBs?
Mm-hmm.
Fabulous. So who's going first?
We can go first. Yeah.
Okay, all right. I'm going to move out of the way and I'm going to let you in here. Does somebody want to put the USB in here? It goes. Sorry. Okay. We are recording, yeah. No, they don't. I think the issue is around the double barrel, the changing of the brand. Yeah. So it's the University of Galway. Yeah, that's where the issue lies, and where the other issue lies with Zoom is around. It's going to sound stupid. It's
I don't know. It's 11. Yeah, just a generic. I don't know if it's Q. I thought
the issue with Teams is, and I didn't go with it for this, is that if people are trying to join via Teams, it can be difficult if they're not subscribed to Outlook. So, okay, you all right?
Yeah, how do you actually access these?
Okay, sorry, my apology.
No, no, you're fine.
Is it there? Can you see your
I don't think so.
devices?
Otherwise, maybe we can just send the files to your email.
Can you send the file? That would be the handiest. If you
I'll
send
do
the
that
files to
now.
my email,
Yeah.
you send the presentation to my email and I'll open it from there.
Perfect.
It's probably the easiest way, given that it's just been,
Yeah.
well, it's just been really persnickety this morning for some reason. It's like
Makes more sense. Yeah.
and actually it does make more sense for me to have a copy because I'll need them for the external examiners anyway.
That's perfect.
So okay, Emily is trying to join, so I need to send her an updated.
Does, yeah. It's quite professional.
Looking at the passports too.
I've got them both. I'm just going to invite Emily
Yeah, sure.
to
I haven't raised it.
I think it was I want to invite
Oh, I see.
yeah, and yeah, Emily Gray has her. No, let's send you. And you an update. And okay, and it's this group first, so we shall open them here like this. Oh wow, what a lovely. Did you get this map? I love
Yes.
love maps. Open a PowerPoint. Good start. Good start. She likes maps.
Put all I call on the on the map.
About the what?
You're in the right presentation if you like maps.
Yeah, well, you didn't get a chance this year to oh no, come on.
Maybe it's easier if you download it. Yesterday we had many
Okay.
problems going like from presentation on the computer to drive and back.
No problem. No problem. My God, this is giving me palpitations. Palpitations. Download. No.
Oh God, yeah, I know.
I sometimes just give it a rub. I'll give it a little rub. Okay. Here we go, save here. Now, where did that actually save? There we go. There we go. Here we go. Apologies, folks.
Share the screen, but then because it's not sharing on Zoom yet. So if we SD out of that and then Share the screen on
Zoom.
Zoom.
Zoom in.
Right, go to Zoom.
Share screen.
Yeah,
That one.
and then click on this one.
Oh, no, maybe not this one.
You are sharing.
Just click the bottom.
Fine, if you start the presentation now, it will. go to the presentation.
Okay, so do I,
You look like you're
Say?
60s.
okay, and we need to come up with this.
Arrow marks, yeah.
All right.
Take two.
Jane.
And it's really hard because you're looking down, you're looking up, and it was not like that in previous years.
Navigating that.
It's the first times I've used this. It's awkward.
And rough.
Just a reminder that if someone's speaking, we have to all the rest of us be quiet because it gets very confused very.
So you will make your presentation and there'll be time at the end of the presentation for questions and answers. And best of luck.
Yeah, so welcome to our presentation. We have a project on public participation in cycling infrastructure policies in the city of Sarajevo, aka Project Bicycle. The contents for this presentation are as follows. We start with an introduction, then we discuss our initial research plan. We then go into the ethnographic research with an informal, semi-structured interviews and ethnographic analysis. We then go into a lecture that we gave at the University of Sarajevo, in which we gave an interactive presentation and we did focus groups. And then at last we had interviews with four kind of stakeholders. And then at last we have a conclusion.
Our project's aim was to assess public participation in cycling policies in Sarajevo. As is commonly known, the citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina are extremely car dependent due to poor public transport infrastructure, which often leads to heavy traffic congestion in the city during rush hour. That dependency is also a contributor to the air and noise pollution. We also aimed at assessing Bosnia's current incentives and strategies to encourage public participation in sustainable transport policy making processes and decisions relating to cycling infrastructures and alternative modes of transportation at municipal level using mixed methods, participation, observation, focus groups, and policy document analysis. Throughout this fieldwork, we had an in-depth experience of the many faceted complexities of this issue, especially on the notion of public participation in Sarajevo. Our original research question was to understand how public participation can facilitate the engagement of cyclists in urban sustainable transport policies in Sarajevo. However, during fieldwork, we decided to focus on youth engagement in cycling policies. As a group, we noted that cycling is a socially equitable form of transportation, as it is affordable and accessible for the majority. Cycling also produces zero air and noise pollution, and bicycles also take up a fraction of the space that cars do. The use of bicycles as opposed to vehicles helps in alleviating traffic congestion while simultaneously reducing carbon emissions. Economic benefits include a higher attractiveness of the city, attracting more tourism due to greener and cleaner cities. The city center of Sarajevo is flat, making it suitable for cycling. There are a few objectives to cycling. Our objectives are as follows. We wanted to highlight the current opportunities for public participation models in Sarajevo's decision-making processes. We wanted to gauge citizens' views and perceptions on cycling infrastructures in Sarajevo. We wanted to encourage public participation in cycling policies in Sarajevo and Bosnia. as a whole, and investigate the willingness among bicycle users to participate in future local public policies. Our contingency plan. We had a contingency plan of interviewing stakeholders virtually in the event that we could not meet them when we reached Sarajevo due to other commitments. On the trip, there were not enough participants for the focus group, so the method of research had to change. It was difficult to recruit participants during the day, so we decided to focus on doing semi-structured interviews. We asked prepared questions during small group discussions on campus with students. We also used maps as a discussion tool and followed a semi-structured approach of interviewing, which allowed for open and closed-ended questions and flexibility. This came in handy as we had a limited amount of time in Sarajevo to collect information. We had 14 separate groups with 40 individuals. I now hand over to my colleague Nessa, who will address us on the ethnographic research.
So we conducted informal semi-structured interviews on the campus of the University of Sarajevo with, as Shatuna said, 14 different groups of students. And we asked them if they felt safe cycling in the area. 16 people said that they did feel safe, and then with a slight majority, 18 said that they did not. This was due to a host of reasons, but mostly it was due to the unpredictable weather conditions, the potholes on the paths, few cycle lanes, mountainous terrain, theft of bicycles was common. There is no respect for cycle lanes, and there was some instances of bicycle vehicle collisions. We also asked them if they thought cycle lanes, an increase of cycle lanes in the area would increase cycling. 20 people said that they thought that this would, while 14 people said that this would not. They thought this because of the reasons above, but also the lack of bike racks. How are they going to cycle without any place to park their bike? And a theme of culture of laziness came up, something we had not anticipated before going there. It was used to explain the lack of cycling. One man was very adamant about this. He said that people of Sarajevo are stuck in their ways, and that all they like to do is sit, smoke and drink. We also asked them if they were interested in engaging in public participation in governance. 14 men said that they would, and 16 women said that they would, while only 3 men said that they would not. Although there was some concerns with this public participation, they were worried about their personal information to the government. They also didn't believe that the government would implement the change. And all of this indicates a lack of faith and trust in the government. We asked them about their own cycling participation. We found that only 1 woman cycled in the city, 10 people cycled recreationally, and then 24 people did not cycle at all. We found that there was a theme of cycling as a hobby rather than a mode of transport. We also conducted an ethnographic analysis. We traveled using 3 e-scooters and 1 bicycle, with the app Spin Bin for the e-scooters and Next Bike for the bike. Some of the observations that we made were that the cars were very fast, the roads were narrow, the paths had many potholes, and unfortunately we were scootering around after the rain, so there was lots of puddles to avoid. People were very wary of the e-scooters. I know Rutger was trying to pass out a few people and he dinged the bell, and they were very frightened. We also found out from talking to some people that there was contention of where e-scooters should be. So should they be on the cycle lanes or the pedestrian paths? I personally believe they should be on the cycle lanes. They can go very fast, but there weren't many cycle lanes, unfortunately, in Sarajevo. This is a map of the route we took. We started at the green diamond above. Just below that, I think, was probably the most dangerous place. It was, do you mind if I, yeah. Just around here was probably the most dangerous place. To cross roads, I felt very unsafe. Many of my colleagues did also. I think Rutger was the only one that felt okay, but he's used to using bicycles on the road. And then we traveled along along here. This was much better. We were on the path, although there was, again, a lot of potholes. I think the best place we traveled was along here. I'm going to go into further detail in the next slide, but there wasn't many potholes. It was very nice. There's a lot of space. We were supposed to end our trip there, but we couldn't find a place to deposit the bikes. The bikes have to, if you can see up here, have to have I don't know what you call it, a deposit. You have to deposit the bikes at these places. We couldn't find any. We eventually found one. It was full up, so we had to continue our route all along here, way up here. There was, again, more potholes. The e-scooters themselves were fine because you can deposit them anywhere. You just have to sign into your app, so it was handy enough. And then finally, we also conducted an ethnographic analysis along the Wilson Promenade. It is closed after 5 p.m. So closed to traffic after 5 p.m. So it becomes a recreational area. So you'll see pedestrians, people on scooters, cycling, very nice. It doesn't look it in the picture, but it was quite busy. And it's very safe because there's ample space for walking, cycling, and there's no motor vehicles.
All right, then I'll talk a bit about the methods of doing a lecture on the University of Sarajevo. As mentioned before, we wanted to do a focus group with stakeholders, but because of limitations, we were not able to acquire enough participants. Luckily, we were able to get in contact with a professor who said that we could do a kind of lecture. And this lecture consisted out of explaining our project, doing an explanation of our project, and also explaining best practices in the literature, and doing a focus group with participatory mapping. Students in this lecture were 20 third-year traffic management students, and so we begin with the interactive presentation. And as you can see in the picture, everyone is very engaged on their phones, but that was part of the deal. So the first question we asked in this interactive presentation is, what is, in your opinion, the most important form of transport? And before we conducted this or did this lecture, we assumed that everyone would say that cars would be the most important form of transport, especially in Sarajevo, as it's such a car-dependent city. But apparently they also kind of said that public transport is very important to them, and a lot of students use public transport to go through the city, and a few like cycle and walking and and driving. Yeah, so mostly cars, but also public transportation, which is good in our opinion, and adds to the kind of sustainability of the city. So then we asked them, when you think of Sarajevo, what are the top 3 problems regarding the city? And here we assumed that indeed air pollution or something about the political situation of Sarajevo would be the biggest problem. We were right in the air pollution. Most of the students said that air pollution was the biggest problem. But we found it interesting that a lot of the students found kind of traffic jams and safety in transport and not liking to walk, but I think that's just a personal matter. Yeah, the geography of the city is also kind of important. The hills make it difficult for a correct city planning in that sense. So yeah. Then we asked them which topic concerns you the most about Sarajevo, and the biggest topic that concerned them the most was corruption, which is understandable because if the political situation is not correct, it's difficult to implement more cycling infrastructure. And as we saw in the other slide, air pollution was already a big problem, and we can see that here again. But also the immigration of young people, especially for the students, was a big problem. And you see, because of if you compare the kind of bigger issues with the smaller issues of bad traffic and lack of cycling infrastructure, you can see that they outweigh the cycling problems much more. So then we also asked them what their favorite or good examples of cycling infrastructure was according to them. The red boxes are what they would argue, which are pictures of separated cycling lanes from the cars. which is a good thing, but you have to take into account that the city would have to have the space for that. And the blue box is one person who cycles through Sarajevo always, and who's one of the interviews who Philip will talk about. And he said that he preferred that, especially in the case of Sarajevo, as it's a combination of a car, a road with a cycling lane next to it. So there you see a kind of difference in the importance of the context of the city. So then we, after this kind of presentation, we put all of the students in 4 groups of 5 each, and the girls and the boys were mixed together as well. And in this focus group, we tasked them with participatory mapping, in which they can show kind of negative and positive perceptions. And the more purple or red it is, the more worse their perception is of the area. And the more green it is, the more positive they are about the area. So as you can see around the city center right here, the purple area, all groups agreed that that's the worst part for cycling, and that should be tackled the most, and there should be more infrastructure there. And then around the bigger area of the city center, it's still not great, as there's a lot of red, but you can see a few spots of green as well. So that's good. And along the river especially, it's more positive, as there's more space for it as well. And you got the roads that open up after 5 o'clock for pedestrians, which is nice. So the notes they gave us, that it's good that some roads are banned for motor vehicle traffic. It's good that there's broad paths for walking and cycling, but some paths are like the opposite, and there's not enough. And the students also proposed infrastructure, for example, car parking. You can see right here, for example, they wanted to have more car parking outside of the city, and then through public transport, the students could, or the people could get into the city more easily. They proposed green areas as well, and things like that. So they are kind of, there's mixed feelings, especially around the city center. It's problematic, but outside of that, there can be arguments that infrastructure is well organized, and they're on their way for progress. And then we also asked them if they would be willing, the students would be willing to participate in cycling infrastructure policies, and most of them said they would. And I think that most of the youth in Sarajevo or Bosnia-Herzegovina would, but they also said that that's mostly just the youth, and the older generations are not per se willing to participate in it. So that's interesting as well. And it will be interesting to see how you can introduce the older generation in public participation as well.
Okay, thanks, Rutger. So next, we're going to move on to the interviews we conducted. So prior to conducting interviews, we wanted to be quite broad in our scope of who we interviewed. We didn't want to be too narrow in the narrative. So first person we have on the left here, apologies for the translations of names. It's not my first language. So Ahmed Saramovic. So Ahmed is the managing director of Next Bike Sarajevo, and what Next Bike are is a bike sharing company present in Sarajevo, but they have locations predominantly in Germany, but they have 25 locations worldwide. And what Ahmed was trying to propose and trying to engage with is this idea of bike sharing as a sustainable mode of transport. So as Nessa kind of alluded to there, there's locations where you pick your bike up, you pay a small fee, and then you transport to another station. So Ahmed is a strong proponent of this. He's trying to increase his range of bikes and locations across the city. And he's also a cycling enthusiast, which is a good added benefit to interviewing him, as he's an active cyclist, which is something we found quite rare in Sarajevo, to find someone who actively participates in cycling. And he also lived in the Netherlands, so him and Rutger were very good friends by the end of it. The next person we have is Damir Margetta. So Damir is a bicycle infrastructure advocacy director at Giro de Sarajevo. What Giro de Sarajevo is an NGO corporation, and what they do is they highlight some of the inefficiencies of the infrastructure across Sarajevo. So they're quite active on their Facebook page. Damir himself has written quite extensively on the issues of bicycle infrastructure in Sarajevo. And what Damir also has started to do now is he's gone into a more innovative form of safety for bicycles. So he's patented this Parco system, which is a bicycle parking concept. He's the CEO. And what he's done is to integrate an e-scooter and bicycle locking mechanism. So I'll talk a bit later about how the e-scooters, it's been kind of alluded to, but e-scooters is now an emerging form of urban mobility in Sarajevo. Next, we have Dr. Osman Lindov. So Dr. Osman Lindov is the University Professor at the Faculty of Traffic and Communications at the University of Sarajevo. His group is where we conducted our lecture and focus group. He writes extensively on mobility and data collection of how to come up with new ideas of how we actually do transport in cities, especially within Sarajevo. And he's also got a licensed user experience for inclusive cycling in cities. So again, he's a strong advocate for cycling in major cities and especially in Sarajevo. And then finally, we have Saraj Said. Saraj is an engineering student in Sarajevo. He's also something of a rarity where he is an aspiring politician, which he was strongly advocating for. And he also wants to stay in Sarajevo. So as we've seen from the previous slides, a big concern within Sarajevo is the high levels of immigration. So Saraj wants to stay. He wants to try and engage the youth in participation in politics within the city. And he's also an aspiring lawyer. So very ambitious young man. So from our interviews, from the initial kind of data analysis, some key themes have emerged and they kind of correlate with the focus group and also with the interviews we conducted as well. So concerning biking infrastructure, the two main themes were more bike parking and greater cycle lanes, which is something we've alluded to in the previous slides. So in regards to the bike parking, before we went to Sarajevo, we did a lot of research on the mobility policies within Bosnia and Herzegovina at large, but also within Sarajevo. And I suppose initial thoughts on these insights is I wouldn't personally for myself, but as a group, we didn't think about bike parking as a big problem or an issue. So we came with the assumption that cycling lanes were going to be the greatest concern, but just a practicality that there's actually no physical space to park bikes was not something we considered. So that was definitely a new insight. Kind of the sub themes below that were decreasing rental costs. So Next Bike, unfortunately, is privately funded. They're trying to collaborate with local government institutes, but it's something that hasn't happened quite yet. And then e-scooter dominance again is something an issue we might further research, but e-scooters are now selling bicycles in Sarajevo at a rate of about 3 to 1. So e-scooters is definitely a new emerging area of urban mobility, which will require further analysis after this research. So just a quote in regards to the city centre, which the students had highlighted, as Rutger said. Around the city centre, in most European cities, is where the tourism is. It's where you want to kind of deter cars from being. And just a quote we had here is there are some bike lanes in the city, but one part of the city, most of the centre and the old town, which are also attractive tourist areas, lacks a lot of bike lanes. So that is a big area that the city could utilise to, one, attract tourism. 2, pollution is always heralded as a major issue. This could help tackle that as well. So the next issue I had was regarding actual bike safety. And again, the main 2 themes are regarding stolen bikes and provision of bike stands. So stolen bikes, again, maybe being naive. Again, it wasn't a big issue we thought of initially, but a lot of people reiterated that stolen bikes is a big barrier to cycling. So again, when people cycle, it's more for recreation, it's more in the hills, mountain biking around the city. Stolen bikes is a big issue, and that ties back to provision of bike stands and more bike parking. So without those infrastructure to actually safely park your bike, most people won't risk actually cycling. Another 2 issues that emerged was increasing greater awareness of cyclists and greater fines. So drivers in Sarajevo, there's not much space for cyclists to actually cycle on the road. And drivers are not cognizant of cyclists or the fines one interview we did, they said the fines aren't that great, so there's no great deterrent. So drivers will, if they do get fined, they're rarely implemented, and if the actual amount of the fine isn't great enough to deter people from trying to be more cognizant of cyclists. So bike safety is again a big barrier towards people cycling in Sarajevo. The quote at the bottom is just, if you compare driver and actions compared to the rest of Bosnia, you see that they don't care for cyclists. So there's definitely a distinct narrative that cars are not considerate of cyclists on the road. So next we move into governance and public participation. So in terms of governance, the lack of support and constant change within the political sphere is a big issue regarding how infrastructure is implemented. So a lot of the planning is symbolic in nature. Plans are put forward, they are manifest, they are put out to the public. Consensus is agreed upon from many citizens, because a general consensus is most people want to engage more with both public participation and actually sustainable transport. But unfortunately, within Sarajevo and Bosnia-Herzegovina at large, the political changeover is every 2 to 4 years. So there's just not the actual time for politicians to engage these policies and actually implement them. So again, a quote we heard from a few different sources is, it's hard to get anything done really. It's good that they decide the thing we need to do and what we'd like to hear, but I don't know, it never seems to be put into law. And that's kind of the general apathy that a lot of citizens feel, is that whilst they are willing, as some of the students said, they want to get involved, it just seems they don't know how to, or if they do, it just seems to be symbolic in nature, and then plans are put forward and plans end. So finally, in regard to public participation, like I just mentioned, there is a willingness to engage, but the distrust is always omnipresent. Again, prior to going to Sarajevo, there was citizen surveys conducted, and distrust was very high across Bosnia-Herzegovina and in Sarajevo. And time constraints is again something I wouldn't have considered. Us the group as well, that some of the students again would be willing to engage, but literal time, they just don't have the time. And as we've seen, when you have the overarching issues of pollution, immigration, the idea of spending your time engaging with public participation with biking policies, it didn't seem to be that important. One kind of platform that emerged is this idea of mapping platforms, online mapping platforms, where if you try to, instead of this idea of public participation, it was difficult to translate to students whose language wasn't English. It didn't really translate very well. So to kind of overcome this idea of engaging the public through the idea of mapping, or how would you change the city, giving agency and power to the citizens seem to be a good method to do. Within the city, they have a program called Urban Labs, which put out to open tender to citizens, then they give their ideas of how to change the cities. And I think this idea moving forward, if you were to continue this research, I think that is the best way. We think it's the best way to engage the public, where it limits the time constraints. The distrust is slightly negated because it is an open source. It is timestamped, so people can see who's inputted what and when. I'll just end on this quote, which kind of sums up how there's the want to implement good policies and change, but we do it alone without any support from the city and government, while for other cities we do it in cooperation. And that's what we're trying to foster, is that engagement between public, government, and how to engage everyone together in open and kind of transparent form of governance. And that's hopefully what this research may help kind of foster in the future. So we'll just finish on the conclusion.
Yeah, just to say you're over 25 minutes talking now.
Sorry, I'll just hurry up then. So based on our 3 types of methods, we found out that related to cycling infrastructure, more bike parking should result in less death, and cycle lanes are well provided close to the river, but not within the city center. Cycling policies, if the law would be more enforced, there would be a better mentality both for cyclists and for car users. And related to public participation, there's a willingness for public participation, but there's also a kind of lack of initiative and trust. So in general, there's a clear progress is being made, but the local government can use its public funds much more efficient through better cooperation and communication with key stakeholders, as well as the general public. However, the political complexity makes this difficult. Bosnia and Herzegovina and Sarajevo have bigger problems than a lack of public participation in cycling policies. And a short reflexive note on maybe personal and maybe speaking as a group. We came to Sarajevo thinking that we could kind of like change the city, but it's too complex. And yeah, but we really enjoyed working with and working with the people. So, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
I'll open to the floor for questions.
Can we ask questions too?
Yes, you can
I
ask.
just wondered, when you had the focus groups in the university and you like showed what kind of themes or problems, not like the next slide. Yeah. What came up, were these things that you kind of gave them as examples, or did they come up? Was it an open-ended kind of question or like closed?
No, it was a closed.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Well, I suppose when we had put that up, yeah, we were hoping maybe as transport students to be more of an engagement with the lack of cycling infrastructure.
Yeah.
Or the bad traffic, because that's the faculty they're in. So I suppose it was a good insight into how those problems are obviously within their studies, and the overarching issues of air pollution, corruption, and immigration were more pressing.
I have a question on methods. I think it's fair to say you had to do a lot of thinking on your feet in the field, which is obviously common for this kind of field work, but I think your group particularly had to really pivot in certain directions. So what impact did that have on kind of your overall project, and what's your experience, I suppose, of getting those changes?
Yeah, I think we'd mentioned maybe in our initial research draft that we mentioned that it's good to stay flexible. So we had a contingency plan which we kind of were hoping we didn't have to use. The focus group would have been great because we were facilitated by the university very kindly, but I think it's as a group, because we had that contingency plan, it wasn't that much of an issue. Obviously we had to Sausage was that was an interview we gained while we were over there. So once we knew that we needed to go to interviews, we were kind of on the ground there. We started to engage with more citizens to try and get more different perspectives. So we had citizen perspective, NGO, academics. So I think as a group, we kind of, yeah, no, I think because we had that contingency plan, we had a framework. Obviously for all research, you can't do that, but it might be good to have in the background just in case something like that happens. So
I think we're also anticipating that the language barrier would be a bigger issue than it was. We approached 15 groups on the campus and only one couldn't talk to us because of the language barrier. So it was great, and everyone was very friendly.
yeah.
So I think it's about flexibility for project as well. We in our initial project, we wanted to do focus groups and just ethnographic research, but because we couldn't find that many participants, and also the time that the participants could meet with us was different. So instead we just did interviews, and it was during our week in Sarajevo as well that the professor came to us with asking us if we would do a lecture. So within that week we had to create a PowerPoint and create an interactive.
Well, 24 hours.
Yeah,
That's what happens.
Yeah.
the evening before the lecture we were still working on it.
Welcome to our world.
Yeah, I think as well we utilized what we had. So obviously the focus group was in the university. So once we knew that wasn't happening, rather than kind of sit there and think, well, so what we're going to do, we went out to the university and engaged the students. And we used the time well, rather than just sitting down and thinking, well, like, why didn't this work? So I think we're very adaptable and flexible.
Was it a combination of lack of cycling culture or infrastructure? Just like as you come back, so like there's a lack of bicycle culture or infrastructure, which is the most overarching issue in your opinion?
It's both. I think a lot of them said that it was to do with, again, culture of laziness was brought up, and that there isn't a culture of cycling, which is true. But I do think that a big factor in that is the lack of cycling infrastructure. How can there be big cycling culture when the infrastructure isn't there?
It's it's as a regular cyclist. I'm a regular cyclist. I'd be happy to cycle. It was definitely, you're very wary. You're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place where you can't. There's no space for you to cycle on the road, and drivers don't respect you. While if you go on the footpath, people are happy you're cycling, even when you ring a bell, or the infrastructure is actually quite difficult to cycle around, like potholes. If you're constantly aware of your surroundings, like your spatial awareness has to be, you have to be constantly scanning. So I know they're starting some like the parts that are, what's kind of hopeful is the parts that are done, like the street that is closed off and the cycle lanes that are there are very good. So if they could expand that, I think there's definitely scope to increase the cycle infrastructure. So
Do you find that the topography of the city was in any way a barrier to cycling? And like the city centre, yeah, is quite flat, but obviously a lot of the residential areas are up in the hills. And I mean, like, would this whole electrification of biking improve that? And therefore there would be a cost implication involved. So would that be something that would also be a barrier, the cost?
yeah, I think so. I think that was definitely cited as one of the main benefits of the bike sharing, is that it's cost effective, especially for students. The hills, I suppose before we left, we knew the topography was barrier. It definitely is a significant barrier, and I think that's why e-scooters are accelerating within the city, because you can negate the hills to a certain point. Obviously, regarding electric bikes, I don't know. Yeah, it would make for ease of use, definitely makes sense, but I don't know if the cost will be too much for citizens. But it's for sure, it's definitely a barrier, because most students we talk to as well, most use the tram or walked, or bikes or scooters, which are obviously lower cost rather than driving. So yeah.
And relating to the topography, I would also say that kind of enables cyclists as well. What we see is there's a lot of cyclist enthusiasts who cycle for leisure or through the nature, and a lot of mountain bikers that cycle through the mountains. And I don't think we kind of took that into account, that that group also exists.
Yeah, so student I talked to I didn't realize there's a mountain bike trail around all the way across the city from the top, which is something that's not, I don't think tourist wise could be pushed a bit more, so maybe they could utilize the topography to their benefit. In the city, it's obviously a barrier depending on where you live as well, but I think it could, it's obviously a negative and a barrier, but if they could push more the recreation cycler or leisure cyclists, like mountain bike or cycle crossing, they could push them towards the paths that already exist, because they're apparently we didn't know this, but there is a lot within the mountains and the forests around the city. So
We're just starting to open
yeah,
those trails. I think
Yeah.
that's probably the issue. It's
Yeah.
not quite one thing.
Mhm.
I want to hold it there now, because I have a couple of comments that I want to give you myself, and then I want to move on to the second group, because I'm conscious that it is 11:05.
sorry.
And I have to commend you on the amount of data that you've gathered, particularly in the context of having to pivot while in the field. Pivoting always happens. It's the nature of the beast. What I'm really interested in, and I'm not looking for an answer now because I think it's a bigger question, is how you triangulate the different data sources that you've collected to think about scaling up this project to make it something bigger. And one of the things, and probably the only thing for me that was missing from that presentation is, and I'll be looking for it in the second proposal, is the linkages between the data that you've presented there and what you read, the literature that other academics have written on this theme. So that will need to come out and be strengthened for the proposal. So just to bear those two things in mind, I would also look at national bike ownership. Is any of that data collected in the most recent census?
I did search for data on cycling and like ownership, but it's really hard.
The last one was 2013, I think. Demir said. So there's not, he done some research himself. I don't know if it's publicly available yet regarding the e-scooters.
Yeah.
So in terms of nationally, there doesn't seem to be much, yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing just to flag is around public transport. One of the positive legacies of post-Soviet Eastern Europe was the really good, always on time, completely reliable public transport system. So